You wake at 20 inches the morning needing to urinate, and what you're about to do next may be silently breaking the most important part of your sleep cycle. Not occasionally. Not once in a while. For millions of adults, this happens every single night. Often at nearly the exact same time. And most people never question why. They assume it's harmless. They assume it's normal. But the timing is the warning. You blame the water you drank before bed, or the tea at dinner, or your bladder. Maybe it has weakened with age. Maybe it just can't hold what it used to. If you're male and over 50, you blame the prostate, the gland that wraps around the urethra and narrows the exit as it enlarges. These explanations feel logical. They feel complete. But none of them explain why it happens at 20 inches the morning. Again and again. With almost mechanical precision. Because if this were really about how much you drank, the timing would vary. If it were just your bladder, the pattern would be inconsistent. But your body is not acting randomly, it is following a system. And right now, at the exact moment you wake up, something very specific is happening inside you that you cannot feel. Something is filling your bladder at 20 inches the morning that was not filling it at 20 inches the afternoon. And the source is not your kidneys working harder, not your water intake, and not your bladder capacity changing. The source is your legs. Stay with this. Because once you understand what your body is actually doing in those hours, you won't just understand why you wake up, you'll know exactly how to stop it. By fixing the cause most people never even realize exists. The source is your legs, and that sounds impossible until you understand what your body has been doing all day. From the moment you stand up in the morning, gravity begins to pull fluid downward through your circulation. Not dramatically. Not in a way you notice immediately. But steadily, hour after hour. A portion of your blood plasma moves out of the vessels and into the soft tissues of your lower legs. By the end of the day, that shift can amount to several hundred milliliters of fluid quietly stored in your calves and around your ankles. You may see faint sock lines, a slight tightness in your shoes. Most people ignore it, but your body does not, because that fluid does not disappear. It waits. And when you lie down at night, the physical conditions that held it in your legs begin to change. The vertical pressure gradient that kept fluid pooled below your heart is suddenly gone. Your body is now horizontal. Circulation redistributes. And slowly, that stored fluid begins to move back into your bloodstream. Not all at once, but predictably. Consistently. And on a timeline your body repeats every night. This is why the timing matters. This is why it is not random. And this is why what wakes you at 2:00 a.m. has nothing to do with what you drank. It has everything to do with what your body has been quietly holding and is now preparing to release. What happens next is not subtle, it is mechanical. And it is happening whether you notice it or not. During the day, your body is working against gravity every second you are upright. Blood is pushed down through arteries. But returning it upward through veins requires pressure, valves, and movement over time, especially if you sit or stand for long periods. Some of that fluid escapes the circulation and settles into the surrounding tissues of your lower legs. This is not a defect. It is physics. Capillary pressure rises. Fluid filters outward. And your ankles and calves become a temporary reservoir. You might see faint indentations from your socks. You might feel a slight heaviness by evening. That is your body storing fluid in plain sight. But the system does not end there. Because the moment you lie down, the rules change. The vertical column of pressure that kept fluid pooled below your heart disappears. Hydrostatic forces rebalance. Venous return becomes easier, and the fluid that spent the day accumulating in your legs begins to re-enter your bloodstream. Slowly at first, then more steadily. As the hours pass, this is not random movement, it is redistribution, driven by pressure gradients that your body follows with precision. At the same time, another system comes online. With your legs level with your heart, the veins no longer fight gravity. Blood that struggled to return during the day now flows more freely. The volume inside your circulation increases. Your central blood volume rises. Your heart senses that change not emotionally, Not consciously, but mechanically, through stretch receptors embedded in its walls. And this is where the process shifts from physics to physiology. Because when that returning fluid reaches a certain threshold, your body does not store it. It responds. It prepares to remove it. And that response is timed, not by the clock on your wall, but by how long it takes for that fluid to make its way back into circulation after you fall asleep. Which means the moment you wake up at 2:00 a.m. is not a coincidence, it is the exact point at which your body has completed a process that began hours earlier, while you were still on your feet. And once that threshold is reached, a signal is triggered that changes what your kidneys do next, a signal that explains why your bladder fills, why the urge feels unavoidable, and why simply drinking less water will never fix what is actually happening. The moment your body decides to act is not when you fall asleep, it's when enough fluid has returned to your circulation to force a response. And that delay is everything. From the time you lie down, it typically takes 2 to 3 hours for the fluid stored in your legs to fully re-enter your bloodstream. That is not a guess. It is a pattern observed across sleep physiology and fluid shift studies, where central blood volume rises gradually after a person transitions from upright to horizontal. Which means if you go to bed at 1:00 p.m., your body reaches that threshold right around 1:00 to 2:00 a.m., exactly when you wake up. This is why the timing feels so precise. This is why it repeats. And this is why changing what you drink rarely changes when you wake. Because the trigger is not your intake, it is the volume of fluid returning to your heart. And when that volume increases, your heart does something most people never realize it can do. It signals your kidneys. Inside, the walls of your heart are stretch receptors, mechanical sensors that respond to pressure. As returning fluid expands the chambers, these receptors activate and trigger the release of a hormone called atrial natriuretic peptide, or ANP. This is not a vague signal. It is a direct instruction. ANP tells your body there is too much fluid, remove it. The effect is immediate and specific. Your kidneys increase filtration. Sodium excretion rises. Water follows. At the same time, ANP suppresses antidiuretic hormone, the signal that would normally help your body retain fluid overnight. In other words, the very system designed to conserve water while you sleep is overridden because your body now believes there is excess volume that must be eliminated. Clinical observations and sleep lab data consistently show that individuals who experience nocturnal awakenings often produce a significant portion of their daily urine output during the night. Not because they drank more, but because their bodies delayed fluid processing until they were horizontal, then released it all at once under hormonal control. And that is the shift most people never see coming. What feels like a simple urge from your bladder is actually the final step of a chain reaction: gravity, fluid redistribution, cardiac sensing, hormonal release, all converging on one moment that wakes you up. Which raises a deeper question: if your body is following such a precise system, why does it feel like a problem at all? And more importantly, why does it keep getting worse over time, even when you try to manage it the obvious way? So this isn't a bladder problem, and that single shift changes everything about how you understand what's happening to you at night. It's easy to assume the urge is coming from the bladder itself, that it's simply reacting to what you drank or how much it can hold. But the bladder is not initiating the process, it's receiving the result of a system that has already decided to release fluid hours earlier. What you feel at 2:00 a.m. is not the cause. It's the final signal of a chain reaction that started long before you fell asleep. Consider this pattern. A man in his early 60s begins waking up once a night, then twice. He assumes it's his prostate. He adjusts his fluid intake. He even changes medications. But nothing changes the timing. It still happens around the same hour, because none of those adjustments address where the fluid is actually coming from. During the day, it continues to accumulate in his legs. At night, it continues to return, and his body continues to process it the only way it knows how, by eliminating it. This is where most people get stuck. They try to control the output without understanding the input. They treat the symptom instead of the system. And because the system is still running, the pattern repeats. Night after night. The same interruption. The same frustration. The same unanswered question. Once you see it clearly, the logic becomes unavoidable. You're not waking up because your bladder failed. You're waking up because your body succeeded in completing a process it was always going to finish. And that realization leads directly to the next problem, because if this cycle continues unchecked, the real impact isn't just the interruption, it's what that interruption does to your sleep, your brain, and your long-term recovery. The real problem is not that you wake up, it's what that awakening quietly takes away from you every single night. Because the moment you open your eyes at 2:00 a.m., your body is not just interrupting sleep, it is interrupting the most biologically valuable phase of your entire night. Deep sleep. The stage responsible for physical repair, memory consolidation, and metabolic reset, is heavily concentrated in the first half of the night. And when you wake during that window, you don't just pause the process, you break it. At first, the effect feels small. You go back to bed. You fall asleep again. You assume nothing is lost. But physiologically, that is not how sleep works. When you wake, your brain shifts states. Neural activity changes. Hormonal rhythms are disrupted. And when you fall back asleep, you don't resume where you left off, you start a new cycle. That means the deep sleep phase you were in is often shortened, diluted, or missed entirely. Over time, this becomes cumulative. Not dramatic, not immediate, but measurable. Studies in sleep physiology consistently show that repeated awakenings can reduce deep sleep by 20 to 40%. That is not just less rest, it is less recovery. Growth hormone release drops. Tissue repair slows. The lymphatic system, responsible for clearing metabolic waste from the brain, becomes less efficient. Which means the brain you wake up with is not fully reset from the day before. This is why the effects show up subtly. You feel slightly more tired, slightly less focused. Your reaction time slows. Your memory feels less sharp. It's easy to blame stress, age, or workload. But the pattern is already there, building quietly, night after night. And it doesn't stop at fatigue. Interrupted sleep increases the risk of insulin resistance, to raise baseline inflammation, and alters appetite-regulating hormones. What begins as a simple nighttime interruption can evolve into a system-wide imbalance. Which brings us to the next layer of the problem, because if waking up at 2:00 a.m. is not random, and the damage it creates is not obvious, then the assumptions people make about what's causing it may be even more misleading than the problem itself. The assumptions people make about this problem are not just incomplete, they often point in the wrong direction. Because once you understand that the timing is driven by fluid returning from your legs, the most common explanations begin to fall apart. Take water intake. It seems logical that drinking less in the evening should solve the issue. And to some extent, it might reduce the total volume slightly, but it does not change the timing. Because the fluid waking you at 2:00 a.m. is not what you just drank, it is what your body has been storing and redistributing over the course of the entire day. Cutting water only addresses a fraction of the system, while the primary mechanism continues uninterrupted. Then there is the prostate. For many men, especially over 50, it becomes the default explanation. The prostate enlarges with age and can narrow the urethra, making urination more difficult. That is real. That is measurable. But it affects flow, not volume. It explains why urination might feel weaker or slower. But it does not explain why the bladder fills at a specific hour every night. The prostate does not control fluid redistribution. It does not trigger hormonal release. It cannot account for the precision of the pattern you are experiencing. Even the idea of a weak bladder misses the point. The bladder is not failing, it is responding exactly as it should to the signal it receives. When fluid arrives, it stores it. When capacity is reached, it sends a signal. It is doing its job correctly. The issue lies upstream, in how and when that fluid is delivered. This is why so many people try multiple solutions and see little change. They reduce fluids, adjust diet, consider medications. Yet the nighttime waking continues. Because the system they are trying to fix is not the system that is creating the problem, and once you begin to see that clearly, another layer emerges because fluid redistribution is not the only pathway that can lead to this pattern. In many cases, multiple systems are running at the same time, reinforcing the same outcome from different directions. Fluid redistribution explains the pattern, but it is not always the only system involved. And that's where the problem becomes more complex than most people realize. Because for many people, especially as the body changes over time, multiple pathways can produce the exact same outcome, waking up at night with a full bladder, and when those pathways overlap, the effect is not replaced, it is amplified. Take sleep apnea. When breathing repeatedly stops during sleep, oxygen levels drop, and the body responds with a stress signal. That signal changes pressure inside the chest and increases venous return, mimicking the same volume expansion caused by fluid shifting from your legs. The heart reacts the same way by releasing ANP, which means even without significant fluid accumulation, your body can still trigger nighttime urination through a completely different pathway. Now, consider diabetes. Elevated blood glucose creates an osmotic effect in the kidneys, pulling more water into urine production. This has nothing to do with gravity or posture. It is a chemical mechanism, but the result feels identical. You wake up at night, again and again, with no clear explanation. Medications add another layer. Diuretics, especially when taken later in the day, increase fluid excretion at the exact time your body is already processing returning fluid. Now the signal is doubled: more fluid, processed faster, at the worst possible time. This is why the problem feels persistent. Because you are not dealing with one cause, you are dealing with a system where multiple triggers can lead to the same outcome. And if you only address one, the others continue silently. Which is why, for many people, this pattern doesn't stay stable, it slowly gets worse, even when nothing obvious has changed. What makes this pattern more concerning is not that it exists, it's that it tends to intensify over time, even in people who haven't changed their habits at all. Because the systems that control fluid balance, circulation, and hormonal signaling do not remain constant as you age. They gradually lose efficiency, and when that happens, the same process that once caused a mild interruption can begin to produce a more persistent and disruptive pattern. During the day, veins in your legs rely on small one-way valves to push blood back toward the heart. Over time, those valves can weaken. Circulation becomes less efficient. More fluid escapes into surrounding tissues, and less of it returns during normal movement. At the same time, the lymphatic system responsible for clearing excess fluid slows down. What used to be a small accumulation becomes a larger reservoir by the end of the day. At night, that larger volume returns. The same process happens, but now with greater intensity. More fluid reaches the heart, more pressure is sensed, and a stronger hormonal signal is released. The result is not just one awakening, but sometimes two or three. Hormonal balance also shifts. Antidiuretic hormone, which normally helps your body conserve fluid overnight, becomes less effective with age. So even as more fluid is being processed, your body is less capable of holding it back. This is why the experience feels like it's getting worse, even when your behavior hasn't changed. The system itself has changed. And once you see that, the question becomes more practical. How do you recognize what type of pattern you're dealing with? And how do you tell whether fluid redistribution is actually the primary cause in your case? If this process is happening inside your body, there are subtle signs, clues you can observe that point directly to fluid redistribution as the primary cause. Not guesses, not assumptions, but measurable patterns your body reveals if you know what to look for. Start with your legs. By the end of the day, do you notice slight swelling around your ankles? Do your socks leave faint indentations on your skin? That is not just fatigue, that is fluid accumulation. And the more noticeable it is, the more likely it is that your body has a larger volume to redistribute when you lie down. Now look at what happens overnight. If your urine appears lighter in color during nighttime awakenings compared to the morning, that suggests dilution, a sign that your body is processing redistributed fluid rather than concentrated waste. Another indicator is weight. In some cases, people can lose up to 1 or 2 pounds overnight. Not from fat loss, but from fluid being mobilized and excreted. That change reflects volume shifting through your system while you sleep. Pay attention to timing. If you consistently wake up within a narrow window, often between 1 and 3 in the morning, that regularity points away from random causes and toward a timed physiological process. The body is following a predictable sequence, not reacting spontaneously. These clues don't require medical testing. They come from observation. And once you recognize them, the pattern becomes clearer, because the issue is not just that you wake up, but that your body is following a process you can now begin to anticipate, and ultimately, change. If the problem is driven by physics, then the solution is not more restriction, it's correction. Not drinking less, not guessing, not trying to suppress the symptom, but changing what happens to that fluid before it ever reaches your bloodstream at night. Because once you understand that your body is simply completing a process it began during the day, the strategy becomes clear. You don't wait for your body to deal with it while you sleep. You shift when and how it happens. The most direct intervention is simple, but rarely explained this way. You bring the fluid back earlier, before bed, while you are still awake. You lie down and elevate your legs, ideally for 20 to 30 minutes. This changes the same pressure gradients your body relies on at night. But now it happens under your control. Fluid that would have returned at 2:00 a.m. begins moving while you are conscious, while your kidneys are still operating in daytime mode. Which means the signal to eliminate that fluid happens before you go to sleep, not in the middle of your deepest cycle. At the same time, you reduce how much fluid accumulates in the first place. During the day, movement becomes critical. The muscles in your calves act as a pump, pushing blood back toward your heart with every step. When you walk, you are not just exercising, you are actively preventing fluid from pooling in your legs. Long periods of sitting or standing without movement allow that reservoir to grow. Breaking that pattern changes the starting point of the entire system. For some, especially those who notice swelling by evening, compression becomes another layer. Properly fitted compression stockings apply external pressure that limits how much fluid leaves the circulation during the day. Less accumulation means less redistribution and less volume for your body to process at night. This is the shift most people never make. They try to control what happens at night, when the process is already underway, instead of adjusting what happens during the day, when the outcome is still flexible. And once you begin to change that timing, the pattern that once felt automatic starts to loosen. But even with the right approach, there are still factors that can quietly interfere with this process. Small habits, hidden variables, things that seem unrelated but can push the system back in the wrong direction if you don't recognize them. Even when you apply the core fix, small habits can quietly override your progress because timing still controls the system. If fluid redistribution is a schedule your body follows, then anything that shifts that schedule can either help you or work against you without you realizing it. Start with caffeine. It feels harmless in the afternoon, but it has a diuretic effect and a long half-life. By the time your body is already receiving returning fluid at night, caffeine can amplify the signal, pushing your kidneys to process more, faster. At the exact moment you want less disruption, alcohol works even more directly. It suppresses antidiuretic hormone, removing your body's ability to hold fluid overnight. Now the system is no longer balanced. You have both increased fluid return and reduced fluid retention at the same time. Medication timing matters just as much. Diuretics, taken later in the day, don't simply work, they peak when your body is most vulnerable to this cycle. The result is not just more urine, but more urine at the worst possible time. Even sodium intake plays a role. Higher sodium during the day increases fluid retention in tissues, which means more volume stored and more volume released when you lie down. These factors seem small on their own, But together, they shift the entire system. And when the system shifts, the pattern returns even if you've already started fixing the main cause. Which is why the final step is not just understanding the mechanism, but recognizing the real-world consequences when that mechanism continues unchecked. Night after night. What makes this pattern dangerous is not the single awakening, it's the chain of consequences that follows. Often without you noticing until it has already taken effect. Because getting up at 2:00 a.m. is not just an interruption. It changes how your body functions in that moment. Blood pressure drops when you stand. Balance is reduced. Vision is not fully adjusted to the dark. And in that state, the risk of falling increases significantly, especially in older adults, where nighttime falls are one of the most common causes of injury. But the risk doesn't end when you return to bed. The disruption to your sleep continues to echo through the rest of the night. Each awakening fragments your sleep architecture, preventing your brain from completing the cycles it depends on. The result is not just feeling tired, it is reduced cognitive recovery, slower reaction time, and decreased mental clarity the following day. These effects are subtle at first, easy to dismiss, but they accumulate. Over time, repeated sleep fragmentation is associated with increased inflammation, reduced insulin sensitivity, and a higher baseline stress response. What begins as a mechanical fluid problem can evolve into a systemic issue affecting multiple aspects of your health. And because the change is gradual, most people never connect the cause to the effect. This is why the pattern matters. Not because it wakes you up once, but because it keeps happening, and each time it does, it reinforces a cycle your body was never designed to repeat indefinitely. And once you understand that, the final shift becomes clear, because this is not about aging, not about weakness, and not about something going wrong. It's about how your body is working and how you can finally take control of it. This is the part most people never consider because the story they've been telling themselves is wrong. It's easy to believe that waking up at night is just a sign of getting older, that your bladder is weaker, that your body is slowly losing control. But that interpretation misses what is actually happening. Your body is not failing. It is following a system, a predictable, mechanical, biological process that has been running the same way for years. You're not waking up because something is broken. You're waking up because something is working just at the wrong time. The fluid moved. The heart detected it. The hormone was released. The kidneys responded. The bladder filled. Every step executed exactly as designed. The only issue is timing. And once you shift your perspective in that way, the problem becomes something entirely different. Not something to endure, but something to adjust. Because if the system can be understood, it can be influenced. If the timing can be predicted, it can be changed. Which brings everything back to where it started, because the moment you wake up at 2:00 a.m. is not random, not mysterious, and not inevitable. It is the result of a process you can now see clearly. So when you wake up at 2:00 a.m., it's no longer random, it's a system you now understand. During the day, fluid collects in your legs. At night, it returns to your bloodstream. Your heart detects the change, releases a signal. Your kidneys respond, and your bladder fills. Nothing is failing, your body is following a precise process, just at the wrong time. And that means you can change it. Elevate your legs before bed. Stay active during the day. Be mindful of caffeine, alcohol, and medication timing. These small adjustments shift the process earlier, so it doesn't interrupt your sleep. You're not fighting your body, you're working with it. If this has been happening to you, know this, you're not alone, and you're not stuck with it. You now have the clarity to take control and improve your sleep and recovery. Save this video so you can apply these steps consistently. And subscribe for more science-based insights to help you take better care of your health. Because your body is always communicating with you. Now that you understand it, what will you change tonight?